The Gripen finally got another flight performance nerf, but it only comes in the form of about a half a degree second less rate. What does that change? Well, pretty much nothing. The only thing that you're actually going to notice is that if you're playing the F-16A Block 10, you probably are going to have an advantage in a 1 versus 1 with the Gripen, maybe, probably. Most people aren't really going to be good enough to actually tell any kind of real difference there, so may as well just say that nothing's different. With the introduction of the Hungary sub-tree though in Italy, it is worth taking a look at the Gripen, I guess, again, because I haven't made a video on it in a while. But before we do that, I do want to mention a couple of things. Firstly, big announcement, my decal is actually in the game now, so if you want 3% off in the Gaijin store as well as get this decal on screen, use my link in the description down below. On top of that, I have created a brand new community squadron, which is here on screen as well. So if you need a squadron to grind squadron vehicles or something like that, this is a good place to go. It is activity based, so do please try to stay active. Some of you are probably thinking, sir, why did you include this clip? All you did was rip your wings and shoot a couple people with HMD. What's interesting about this? Well, I think that this clip demonstrates the effectiveness and the survivability of the Gripen with the insane amount of countermeasures it has in pure volume, but as well as where it deploys. The Gripen's deployment pattern for flares and chaff is definitely the best you can possibly have at top tier. Essentially, it pretty much just drops the countermeasures directly behind your engine. Most of the time, the bull pods and the internally fitted countermeasures are a little bit different in deployment pattern, but it's essentially going to end up in the same spot one way or another. The second best countermeasure deployment pattern being the Soviet style, where they deploy upwards into the air, and the worst is the United States style, or at least the NATO style of deploying downwards. Not only that, but oftentimes, most of the time, they are downward and toward the side, left and right, and that's really what you want to avoid. Sometimes you can invert your plane upside down and deploy your flares and fly through them that way, and it kind of gives you the same effect as the Soviet ones, but that's pretty unrealistic, and nobody's really going to be able to do that in practice. As you're seeing on screen though, with the Gripen's deployment pattern, the 9Ms are kind of just going for the flare. Same with the R-73. I just do a bit of a flare flower. I really don't even have to move, nor can I move in the first place because I am missing a wingtip, and yet it's still pretty effectively managing to decoy not only these IR missiles, but there was a couple of Sparrows and possibly an ER fired in there as well. So that is something that I think makes the Gripen extremely effective, is just the deployment pattern of the countermeasures, as well as, of course, having an infinite number of them is always helpful. I would definitely consider this jet to be the best top tier jet right now at 12.7. There are some better flight performance. Like I said, the F-16A Block 10 is probably arguably a better flight performance plane than the Gripen, but it's not by much, if anything. But again, I do want to harp on the fact that it's really not worth mentioning the differences. You may as well just say that they're both the best planes in the game as far as flight performance goes, and you really wouldn't be wrong. The only thing is, of course, the F-16A is a 12.0 and the Gripen is top tier. I would much rather be playing the Gripen because you get the 9Ms, you get all the countermeasures, you get the HMD. For the most part, what you are going to be fighting, you are going to beat in a 1 versus 1. This is the F-15 that I'm fighting here. I took him vertical because I had an energy advantage at the start, considering I had more altitude than him and probably about equal speed, but I quickly learned and realized that I'm never going to be able to outstall an F-15. He'll probably just wait for me to stall out, then shoot me with his Vulcan as we're both floating in the air from over a kilometer away, and I wasn't about that, so we just kind of keep on turning, move around behind him, and he can't keep up. The F-15 is no slouch in a dogfight by any means. It's probably a top 3 or top 4 dogfight plane at top tier, but the Gripen is just on another level. And so the combination of flight performance as well as the countermeasures we just talked about make this thing extremely annoying to go up against. If there's Gripens on the other team, you want to do everything you can to get them out of the match as soon as possible, because the longer the match goes on, the stronger they're going to get. But not only that, they're just kind of hard to kill in general, no matter the situation, pretty much with the countermeasures alone. If you're 1 versus 1 with a Gripen and you're shooting missiles at them, they are going to be paying attention to that, and you're probably not going to be making any of those missiles connect. You kind of need teammates around so that you can overwhelm him with multiple angles and just hope he's not pre-flaring all of your missiles you're firing at him. Technically, this new Hungary Gripen in the Italian tech tree is the best one in the game if you want to look at it from a ground perspective, because the flight models of all 3 of the Gripens we currently have in the game are the exact same, and they carry the same air-to-air weapons capabilities. But the Hungarian Gripen has the best Mavericks, which is the only difference as far as ground loadouts. They carry the same GBUs, they carry the same targeting pods, but the Mavericks on this one are better than the other models. As much as the Gripen is kind of fun for me to play, it's really my favorite top tier just because of how easy and handheld it is, which makes top tier somewhat tolerable to me. I really don't like the way top tier plays right now, so having the most handheld played in the game does make it more enjoyable. But with now a third country in the game getting a Gripen, it's definitely going to increase the probability of running into them, which makes it so that if you're not playing a Gripen, that much more unenjoyable. For general play styles, you could really play this thing in one of two ways. Firstly, of course, the go-to for many people is just going to be hug the deck. Being low to the ground and being able to multipass SAR missiles is definitely something that is reliable and consistent. And that way you pretty much always know that you're not really being threatened by any SAR missiles from Su-27s especially, and it makes it pretty easy to have the confidence to know which fights you can get yourself involved in on the deck, kind of in the furball, and which ones you can't. And that's a pretty common playstyle for any playing at top tier. A lot of people, especially people lacking a strong number of countermeasures, do want to hug the deck, and I would highly recommend that. But in a plane like the Gripen, where you have tons of countermeasures and you're pretty much never going to run out, I personally like to climb up to really high altitude and utilize the long range of the 9Ms and the HMD, and of course the infinite number of countermeasures to deal with the SAR missiles, and just get right above the enemy team once the furball has started and orbital strike them. If there is somebody that just really focuses you down at high altitude and starts spamming all of their ERs at you, it is pretty annoying sometimes because you are going to have to stay 90 degrees and you're going to have to chaff all of those incoming ERs. Not impossible to do, but it can be very frustrating sometimes. And then, of course, you gotta wait for them to get close enough to not deploy an ER, and then you can start a dogfight. A dogfight in which they're probably gonna be starting roughly on your 6 o'clock, considering you had to hold your 90-degree notch. And that could be a problem, but you are a Gripen, and most of the time they're just like an Su-27 or something like that. So flipping that dogfight is pretty easy, but it is something to keep in mind, and sometimes they can keep you held up long enough to where the match is pretty much over by the time that your dogfight is over, and you gotta just kind of hope your team is the one that won, because if not, you're gonna be alone dealing with everybody else that's left on their team. You can decrease the chances of this happening to you. I'm referring to, of course, somebody focusing you down as you're climbing at altitude by kind of delaying your approach. You don't want to join into the furball around the same time the rest of your team does. You want to give it a second. Hopefully, in an ideal situation, you arrive to the battlefield about 30 seconds to a minute after everybody else. A minute is cutting it a little bit close, but about 30 seconds after everybody else kind of engages and entangles with each other, you want to sweep in from above and get those orbital strikes off. This is pretty much a textbook example of what I'm talking about when it comes to somebody focusing you down at high altitude. I have an Su-27 in front of me who doesn't really look like he's going to be a problem. It looked like he was shooting missiles at other people, but he probably notices my contrail and he turns in to actually engage me, which of course he is. I'm not complaining, but that is going to hold me up for a little bit here as I try to shake him off me. I shoot a 9M, but he turns head on. It's relatively easy for him to escape that. And now we have merged at high altitude, low IAS, which makes this dogfight take even longer just because we're having a really hard time maneuvering. And of course, I have to be mindful of this HMD R73, so I give it some pre-flaring. And as I mentioned, the Gripen's flare deployment pattern is probably the best you're going to ever have at top tier as far as flaring, especially R73s and Magic 2s. And luckily, my teammate is around to actually take care of this guy who is a little bit too tunnel vision on me. Sometimes the fight can take way longer. I'm very thankful that I had a teammate there and he gets me out of this situation quickly, not because I was afraid of dying, but because I want to get back into the fight where everybody else is and actually have some kind of impact on the outcome of this game. And I can't do that if I'm up at 10,000 meters dogfighting an Su-27. And of course, what happened to that Su-27 could have very easily ended up happening to me. It's very possible that the Su-27 had one of his teammates come and third party me, so you do have to keep your head on a swivel. And again, that's one of the reasons why I think that the Gripen is one of the only planes, and certainly the most effective plane at top tier, that can actually do this kind of gameplay. Now that I kind of have some map control per se at the high altitude areas of the map, I am pretty confident that I can dive on some of these guys and they may or may not see me. I'm pretty positive that at least one person out of these three aren't going to see me. It is an awkward angle to be checking directly above you, and not necessarily directly above you, but above and to the right or to the left. People don't always look and pay attention to that kind of an angle. So we salvo off some 9Ms with HMD. I think we get 2 hits out of 3, not a bad result, and that's something that you're going to get very often if you choose to do this sort of playstyle. That leaves just one SU-27 over here to fight me, another Gripen who is an anonymous VTE player, and an SU-27 in our team. Somehow I ended up team killing somebody with those 3 9Ms I salvoed off. I'm not sure where exactly that happened, but of course that is my fault. I take responsibility for that. Of course, when you shoot an IR missile, you have to be absolutely certain that your teammates aren't going to end up flying into it one way or another. So I'm not going to blame my teammate for that. You do have to be a little bit more responsible and a little bit more calculated with where you throw these 9Ms off your plane. So that pretty much does it for the Gripen. This one is no different than the ones we already have. Unless you are a ground RB player, then it is, I guess, a little bit of an upgrade for you. But I'll leave you guys with this clip here, which is pretty much just another example of how I play the Gripen and how I try to come into the furballs and have some kind of impact for my team. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. Be sure to pick up that decal, and I'll see you again real soon.